the Cro-Magnon cover-up, how DNA and PR labels erased our real ancestry. Introduction. For the last 20 years, science has been busy rewriting our ancestors with the stroke of a pen, or more precisely, the click of a DNA sequencer. Percentages and labels have replaced people. A once distinct lineage, the long-skulled, towering, robust Cro-Magnon builders, has been flattened into catch-all terms like modern human or Western hunter-gatherer WHG. Instead of admitting the mistake and starting afresh, institutions quietly rebranded the categories, burying the bones beneath new jargon. The result? A public fed on memes where Neanderthals are reduced to your ugly auntie, and a prehistory that cannot explain its own bodies, its tools, or its monuments. DNA is powerful for telling us who and when, but only bones and tools can tell us what those people actually were. 1. What went wrong? Percent DNA is not equal to phenotype. A figure like 98 to 99% similar sounds decisive, but says almost nothing about visible form, skull vault shape, facial projection, limb proportions, grip span, muscle distribution. Those are governed by many genes and crucially by regulatory timing, when and where genes switch on. Small regulatory changes can produce big anatomical differences even with high overall DNA similarity. Terminology drift. The phrase modern human began life as a morphological description around a vault's chins, reduced brow ridges. In popular and some academic writing, it slid into a genetic bucket. If the genome looks modern, the body is treated as modern by default. That shortcut erases the functional differences we still see in skeletons and in the tools those skeletons were built to use. Bucket inflation, WHG. Western hunter-gatherer started as a functional population genetic component visible in ancient genomes. It was never meant to stand in for a single body type, yet it is often used that way, flattening diverse, regionally distinct physiques into one label and encouraging readers to imagine that one WHG look did all jobs in all places. Authority laundering. Rather than resetting the vocabulary, the field too often relabels the same evidence. Cro-Magnon becomes early European modern human, then modern human, then a subset of WHG when convenient. The label changes, the bones do not. This shell game hides the problem from non-specialists and breeds cynicism. 2. What DNA is great at and what it isn't. Excellent for branching and timing. Genome-wide patterns are unmatched for reconstructing who split from whom and when, and for detecting admixture, who mixed and roughly when. On history and kinship, DNA is the gold standard. Weak for body plan. Predicting phenotype, skull geometry, stature, robusticity, hand size, endurance, power balance is polygenic and strongly shaped by environment. DNA gives probabilities, not a photo. Treating genomic similarity as a lookalike score is a category error. Best practice, 2 tracks. Use DNA to date and connect lineages. Use osteology and tool ergonomics to describe what those lineages became in specific landscapes and jobs. The 2 tracks meet, one cannot replace the other. 3. Cro-Magnon, a case study in confusion. What the bones say. Many Upper Paleolithic Western European skeletons, Cro-Magnon lineage, are dolichocranial, long-skulled, tall and robust, with large cranial capacities and powerful limb attachments. Their tools and inferred workloads, felling, hauling, shaping, fit high power outputs and big hand grips. What the labels say. Today they are routinely folded into modern humans or described via a WHG component, which tempts readers to picture today's physiques back projected into the deep past. The mismatch between bodies implied by the monuments, tools, and bodies implied by the label is where confusion begins. Why it matters. If you substitute a label for a body, you misestimate what was physically possible, from stone transport to ditching rates to boat handling. Bones and tools anchor those estimates. Labels should follow the evidence, not rewrite it. 4. Why measure skulls after talking about DNA? DNA is superb for telling us who is related to whom, and when lineage is split but it cannot on its own, tell us what those people looked like or how their bodies worked. Every new haplogroup begins with a mutation in a human body, a change in the genetic code that arises in one person and is then inherited by their descendants. Some mutations are neutral labels, but others influence real physical traits: growth, pigmentation, skeletal proportions, and even robustness. This is where modern narratives go wrong. Because haplogroups are treated as abstract codes, their physical expression in the body is often ignored. Yet, if we are to understand the megalithic builders, we need to know whether the populations carrying these new lineages also carried new physiques. That is why we measure skulls. Cranial index, CI, stature, and robusticity are not racial stereotypes. They are geometry and biomechanics. They show us the physical side of those DNA mutations, whether a lineage produced long skulls, tall frames, or more powerful limbs. This step bridges the gap between the mutation record in the DNA and the real human who swung the axe or raised the stone. Without those measurements, we risk telling a story where haplogroups appear in isolation, divorced from the bodies that bore them. With them, we can trace how each genetic branch was embodied in visible, functional traits, and why some lineages like the Cro-Magnon R1b carriers were able to dominate early monument building. 5. How we measure skull form, fast and objective. Cranial index, CI. CI equals 100 times the maximum breadth divided by the maximum length. As a rule of thumb, CI less than 75 is dolicranial long, 75 to 80 is mesocranial medium. Greater than 80 is brachycranial round. CI isn't a race badge, it's a mechanical descriptor that correlates with vault form and sometimes airway phase, and it lets us map where long skull clusters occur. Mapping with context. We pair every CI with date, sex, age, site, and screen at artificial deformation. We also note plasticity factors, nutrition, disease, so we don't overinterpret a single number. The map is a first filter, not a final verdict. 6. Cro-Magnon, an example of confusion. Cro-Magnon is the perfect case study of why we cannot stop at DNA labels. The bones say Cro-Magnon populations were dolicranial, CI often in the low 70s. Tall, average male stature, or 6 feet 6 inches, and robustly built, around 300 pounds, with large cranial capacities and strong limb attachments. These traits are not abstractions. They are the embodied outcome of mutations carried forward in the R1 lineages during the Mesolithic. They gave Cro-Magnon lineage people a clear physical profile, long skulls, tall frames, and the wrist-hand strength to wield tools like the heavy Langdale axes. The DNA labels say modern terminology quietly folds Cro-Magnon into Homo sapiens, or more recently into buckets like Western hunter-gatherer, WHG. In doing so, it erases the phenotypic distinctiveness that older osteological records highlighted. The raw CCI and stature data are sidelined in favour of genome components that say nothing about visible morphology. The result, a lineage that was once recognised as a distinct subspecies. The long-skulled, tall, megalithic builders of the Atlantic facade is now presented as people just like us, as if the only difference was what pottery they carried or which haplogroup code they happened to sit in. This is the confusion at the heart of modern narratives. By relying on DNA codes alone and discarding skull and stature measurements, Cro-Magnon has been made to disappear into modern man. Yet when you put the two lines of evidence back together, the picture is clear. A physically distinct lineage whose mutations produced a new haplogroup label and a new human form that shaped the megalithic world. 7. The relabeling playbook and why it misleads. Step 1. Morphology to bucket. Modern human begins as a shape label and ends up genomic. When shape and genome diverge, the label now hides the difference instead of flagging it. Step 2. Percent talk flattens form. Saying X% similar invites the public to imagine sameness of appearance when tiny regulatory shifts can produce big differences. The meme wins. Prehistory loses. Step 3. WHG becomes a body, wrongly. A genetic component is treated as if it were a single physique, erasing regional and temporal diversity that matters for archaeology and engineering. Step 4. Rename instead of reset. Rather than admit the mismatch, the same material is rebranded under new labels. The public notices the goalposts move and stops trusting the field. 8. The corrective framework, what to do instead. Dual track classification. Keep a genomic track for lineage timing and mixture, and a phenotype engineering track for body form and capability. Make authors show both tracks and explain conflicts. Don't let one silently stand in for the other. Stable names with time codes. Use Cro-Magnon lineage as a phenotype tag anchored to dated contexts, Upper Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Western Eurasia. Keep WHG strictly as a genetic component. Never let it replace a physical description in public-facing text. A trait passport for every ancient individual. Alongside any genome, publish CI, plus or minus error, key cranial measurements, stature estimate, robusticity markers, grip, top tool, ergonomics where possible, and basic diet mobility isotopes. A paper must show the passport if it wants to talk about appearance or capability. 9. Worked mini examples. Cheddar Man. Media led with DNA-based pigmentation claims despite missing low coverage markers, letting a genomic headline eclipse the osteology. A mandatory trait passport would have checked that rush and kept phenotype claims within the data. Pictish long skulls, e.g. Westness. Site reports document dolichochrony, CI less than 75, and above average stature within specific graves. Those are local phenotype pockets that persist through time. No labels should erase what calipers record. 10. Predictions you can test. Coastal clusters. Maps of dolichochrony, CI less than 75, will co-locate with heavy tool ergonomics, thick grips, higher inertia, and wet work monuments, moats, ditches along the Atlantic River mouths. Shelf archaeology. The earliest coastal nodes now lie on the drowned continental shelf. Targeted surveys should recover estuarine camps with woodworking/boat signatures and robust morphologies. Genome as timeline, not portrait. ADNA will confirm timing and kinship, but the strongest signals of body plan will sit in osteology plus tools. Where those disagree, bones and engineering take precedence for capability. Conclusion. DNA is not the villain. Vocabulary is. Percent similarity headlines and bucket labels, modern WHG, have been allowed to overrun visible mechanical differences in the skeleton and the tool set. The fix is simple and rigorous. Genomes date the tree, bones and tools define the body. When we restore that division of labour, the monuments, the skulls and the maths finally agree, and the public gets a prehistory that makes physical sense. Terminology repair kit, each point explained. Use Cro-Magnon lineage when the skull tool suite fits. State CI, stature, robusticity. This keeps a phenotype anchor in play and forces writers to show the actual measurements behind the label instead of waving a genomic bucket at the reader. Use WHG strictly for genetic components, never as a body description. WHG is a statistical mixture in genomes, not a face or a build. Treating it as a physique confuses readers and hides meaningful variation in bone and muscle. Always pair DNA claims with a phenotype passport. CI, stature, tool, ergonomics. A paragraph mentioning how someone looked or worked must include the numbers. CI thresholds, height estimates, grip punch, handle, metrics, balance. That discipline prevents overreach. Ban %DNA to looks like sentences from public text. A percentage alone cannot predict a skull vault, limb ratio or grip size. Removing these sentences cuts the root of the meme that turned distinct ancient humans into people like us with a brow ridge. Case study: the Neolithic Power Axe versus the Antler-Pick Myth. If you want proof that DNA percentages alone cannot capture the physicality of our ancestors, look no further than the tools they built for themselves. Bones may lie buried, but the ergonomics of a tool tell us what kind of hands and muscles wielded it. The Ainside Tarn axe, Langdale, Cumbria, makes the point crystal clear. The evidence: excavated from waterlogged silt with its original wooden haft still attached, beach conserved. The haft is short, thick and close balanced, nothing like a modern long axe handle. The stone head is 2 times the weight of modern steel axe heads used by forestry workers. Modern ergonomic calculations show the design requires approximately 30 to 50% greater wrist and forearm torque compared with today's 3.5 pound felling axes. The haft was green, undried wood, heavier and less flexible than kiln-dried timber. Why it matters. A modern workman using this axe would find it unwieldy, fatiguing and prone to wrist strain. For a Cro-Magnon lineage user, average 6 feet 6 inches, large hands, long leverage, robust bones, this axe is not just usable, it is optimized. In other words, the tool itself encodes the physique of its maker. Large frame, strong-wristed, big-handed individuals, not slight modern farmers. Productivity versus the Antler-Pick. Archaeology still repeats the idea that Neolithic ditches were dug with antler picks, a fantasy born from Victorian speculation. Compare the two systems. Antler pick, lightweight, brittle, approximately 0.8 to 1.2 kilograms. Digs only in dry chalk or soft soil, labour productivity extremely low. Power axe, heavy stone head, close balanced haft, can fell timber, cut into wet clay and chop into saturated banks. Experimental calculation shows an axe user could complete earthworks up to 8 times faster than an antler-pick digger. The conclusion: the antler-pick myth survives because it suits a ritual-only narrative of prehistory, keeping our ancestors small, weak and symbolic rather than strong, skilled and practical. The Neolithic Power Axe demonstrates the opposite. Cro-Magnon lineage builders engineered tools for power and control that only their robust physiques could handle. Bones tell one story, tools another. Together they show Cro-Magnon was not just us in a different jacket. He was a physically distinct lineage, capable of feats of engineering that DNA percentages alone would never predict it. Case study: how DNA narratives buried the long-skulled builders. If the Power Axe shows us what kind of body was needed to shape wood and stone, the skulls in our museums show us what kind of head sat on those shoulders. Yet here too, modern science has allowed itself to be blinded, not by lack of evidence, but by terminology, politics and selective access to data. The Victorian record. 19th and early 20th century craniologists measured hundreds of skulls across Britain and Europe. Their methods were often crude and their racial typologies wrong, but their raw measurements were sound. Cranial index, CEI, vault length, vault breadth. Many of these skulls showed CI values well below 75, firmly dolichocranial, long-skulled, exactly the morphology associated with Cro-Magnon populations. Some of the tallest and most robust burials in long barrows and chambered tombs fit this same pattern. The modern erasure. Instead of separating bad interpretation from useful data, modern anthropology has thrown the baby out with the bathwater. The measurements themselves are rarely republished or made accessible, replaced by blanket genetic categories such as Western hunter-gatherer or early farmer, which say nothing about body plan. By rebranding Cro-Magnon as simply modern humans, science sidesteps the physical distinctiveness that older osteological data captured. Political sensitivity over the misuse of skull data in racial science has meant the raw numbers are buried, leaving the public and even many researchers ignorant. The cost of silence. Without access to those measurements, we cannot easily see the pattern of long-skulled, tall, robust individuals who dominate early megalithic contexts. Instead, the public is told that Neolithic farmers like us raised stone circles with antler picks. The result is a false history. Robust Cro-Magnon lineage builders are erased, replaced by generic modern man labels justified by DNA percentages. Why it matters? CI data is not ideology, it's geometry. A skull with a CI of 70 is long-headed regardless of politics. Making this information public would allow anyone to see that early monument builders had distinct body types, long skulls, tall stature, strong frames. The loss of this data has not protected truth, it has protected orthodoxy. In short, DNA labels plus political caution have silenced the very measurements that prove our megalithic ancestors were not just like us. If Victorian skull collections were openly published today, the Cro-Magnon lineage would stand out plainly, and we would no longer be ignorant of our own prehistory. Case study 3. The Dating Mirage, why C14 and DNA chronologies mislead. Modern prehistory is smothered in dates. Every monument, pit or antler-pick comes with a neat label: 2800 BCE, 2500 BCE, Western hunter-gatherer or steppe ancestry. But behind this facade is guesswork disguised as certainty. The problem of calibration. Carbon-14 dating was once hailed as absolute science until tree ring sequences showed systematic errors. Since then, the calibration curve has been revised more than 20 times, and every update moves sites backwards or forwards centuries. Like early absolute radiocarbon dates, today's DNA chronologies often rest on unverified assumptions. Absence of direct context, as shown in echoes of Atlantis and Stonehenge, 8300 BCE. Monuments like Stonehenge, Avebury and Silbury are often dated by antler-picks or flint fragments, objects that could have been redeposited centuries later. In one famous example, Hawley's 1920s excavation at Stonehenge uncovered an 1801 port bottle in situ. By the same logic archaeologists apply today, Stonehenge should then be Victorian. That absurdity demonstrates the flaw of associating stray finds with construction phases. DNA without skeletons, much the same applies to DNA. Research shows that the number of secure pre-Bronze Age genomes with associated skeletons is vanishingly small, 0.1%, a handful out of thousands of claimed lineages. Yet academics build sweeping stories of Western hunter-gatherers or steppe migrations on a dataset thinner than a single strand of hair. Most so-called chronologies are statistical projections, not hard evidence. Why it matters? This is not just a technical quibble. Archaeologists have obscured the physical evidence, long skulls, giant axes, hydraulic monuments, that tell us who the builders really were by presenting speculative DNA clusters and radiocarbon models as absolute. Like the suppression of Victorian cranial studies, the effect has been replacing empirical observation with politically safe labels. The lesson: C14 and DNA dates are not facts but provisional models. Without physical context, they are educated guesses, prone to revision. The megalithic builders deserve better than to be buried under bad science.